During mid-19th century, whale oil was used in candles as a wax and oil lamps as a fuel, and also it was used to make a soap. The ships had the steam engines and they could travel long distances, and also the factories using the steam engine operated for long hours through the night, and the candles and the lamps were very important, keep the night bright. Naturally, whaling industry was booming, and the whalers, once they left home, they had to travel for many months, like 1 year or two. So they needed harbors they can rest and also get the coal and water to let the steam engine going. And frequently the American whalers appeared in the seas around Japan. Unfortunately, at the time, Japan kept the policy of isolation. They don't want to make a trade with Western countries because they thought they're gonna make the Japan very insecure. At the time, British and French was monopolizing the coal stations. The ship can get the coal and water for the steam engines. And also the commerce with China was growing rapidly, so that the American ships get some harbors that they can rest on the way to China. In 1853, the American President Millard Fillmore ordered Commodore Matthew Perry to travel to Japan in order to open up Japan. American Navy fleet were armed with cannons and guns that Japanese had never seen before. When Perry's American Navy fleets showed up at Edo Harbor, Japanese people were freaked out. Large steamboats were fuming dark smokes from the large chimneys, and the boats were painted black. And when the cannons were fired, people became fearful of Americans, and the Shogunate were shaken. Perry delivered the American president's letter to Shogun asking for the treaty, but the Shogunate could not decide it right away, so they were given 1 year waiting period, and Perry left to China. In the meantime, Russians were trying to bring British and French to Japan and to make a treaty. So Perry decided to return in 6 months. This time Perry brought 10 ships instead of 4, and he was threatening the Shogunate with more gunfires and cannon fires. And finally the Shogunate gave it in, and the Perry were able to sign the treaty. The treaty was very unequal, and of course it was very advantageous to Americans over Japan. And the harbor in the north and another one in Edo were opened up after the treaty. Commodore Matthew Perry's visit to Japan and the unequal treaty with America alarmed the establishment of Japan, i.e. samurais. They were starting to question the ability of Japan to defend their sovereignty against foreign influence. The shogunate in Edo became progressively weak over 200 years. At the same time, the daimyos in the local area became quite strong. The daimyos is like a governors in United States of America. In other words, Japan became pretty divisive. So that the samurais in southwestern part of Japan thought that to make the Japan strong, there is a need of bringing the emperor as a central figure. Samurais in southwestern part of Japan divided in two. The one group thought that the emperor should be given the absolute power and the shogunate should be abolished. And Japan, they thought that Japan should be isolated from foreign influence. They rejected basically the foreign influence. But the second group thought that the shogunate should share the power with the emperor. In other words, they wanted to keep the shogunate, but the emperor should have more power than before. And they also accepted the foreign influence. In 1866, Sakamoto Ryoma succeeded in bringing these two groups together. Both groups decided to end the shogunate and bring the emperor to a central figure so that the emperor will rule the country instead of shogun. The two groups were in the samurais in Choshu and in Sasma, and the alliance was called as Sasma Choshu Alliance or Sacho Alliance. In later days, the Sakamoto Ryoma became one of the greatest heroes in Japan. On the 9th of November in 1867, Tokugawa Yoshinobu, the last shogun of the shogunate of Japan, relinquished the power to Emperor Meiji. Emperor Meiji declared that to resist the foreign aggression, Japan must learn the knowledges from the world, particularly from the West. From 1868, the famous Meiji Reform started. Japanese wholeheartedly accepted the Western cultures, system, and technology. The Japanese went to America, England, and European countries, and they learned the new knowledges and came back and applied to the policies of the reform. One of those reformers was Ito Hirobumi. He was the main figure in colonizing Joseon dynasty later. In 1909, 1 year before Joseon was colonized by Japan, he was assassinated by a Korean hero, An Jung-gun. So during mid-19th century, the Japan was rising and the Qing dynasty and Chosun dynasty were declining. And so that in politics in Northeastern Asia at the time was handled by Yi Hongjang in Qing dynasty and Ito Hirofumi in Japan. This is the end of chapter 7.